Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation in our Collegiate Recovery webinar series. My name is Olivia Pinelli, Liv, and I'll be your host today. We're joined by Jay Harris, who will be interviewing about his experience within the collegiate recovery field. These webinars are hosted by the Association of Recovery in Higher Education in order to support the growth and development of the collegiate recovery field. Just a few reminders and logistics before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded. We'll upload it to YouTube afterwards and our website. You'll be able to go back and access all the information at that time. If you have any questions for Jay, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and address it to all panelists. We'll get to as many as we can. If there are any supplemental materials that we refer to, we can provide links for that afterwards. If you're having any technical difficulties or logistical questions, feel free to message us through the chat box too, again, to all panelists. We're always looking for ways to improve, topics to cover, and any other feedback from our attendees. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time and let us know about your experience and any ideas that you might have. Now, before I am going to speak to Jay, I'm going to read his bio. So Jay is a Master of Science and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. His pronouns are he, him. He currently serves as East Carolina University's Collegiate Recovery Program Coordinator and a member of the Alcohol and Other Drug Staff Counselor team for the Center for Counseling and Student Development. Mr. Harris is a strong advocate for the expansion of recovery support resources for underrepresented populations, both regionally and nationally. Mr. Harris currently represents ECU as the president and is currently the president of the Association of Recovery in Higher Education, where he has served on the board in various capacities since 2017. Jay has spent the past decade working in substance use treatment and recovery supports, mostly with adolescents and young adults. Mr. Harris graduated with his bachelor's degree in rehabilitation services and a minor in alcohol and drug services in 2010, later finishing his master's degree in substance use and clinical counseling in 2015 at ECU. Wow, that was amazing. Thanks, Jay. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And congratulations on now being the president. So let's start by talking about how your work began in the collegiate recovery field. How did you get started?
You know, interestingly enough, when I was in graduate school, I was studying to be a licensed clinician and thought that I would continue working with high school students at a local treatment center that I was working at. And I saw the Anonymous People for the first time. And, you know, for those of you who've seen that documentary, about the last 30 minutes of the long version focuses on recovery high schools and collegiate recovery communities. And being an ECU graduate, not in recovery myself, but just knowing the narrative of what it means to be in college and the difficulties individuals have navigating higher education in college in particular, while also being in recovery or exposed to so many substances as many students are. I felt like ECU in particular needed such supports. And I was eager to help start something as a student, as a graduate student at the time. I reached out to professors and folks that I thought could really help point me in the right direction. And long story short, you know, lightning kind of struck in a bottle. And collegiate recovery came to ECU before I even had a chance to really start to make a lot of noise. There were several students from across our state. Many of you may know individuals like Chris Campo, Chase Holland, Hillary Belk, you know, and many other students who were advocating for collegiate recovery. They had seen what was happening across the nation and knew that, you know, North Carolina needed these resources. And so our governor came to ECU and said, hey, collegiate recovery is the wave of the future. We'll sponsor 6 programs across our state, and ECU will be one of them. I immediately got back on the horn and was like, hey, remember me? Like, let's make this happen. And I got an internship to help start the program. And, you know, 5 years later, I'm the program coordinator and we're still going strong.
That's amazing. And so what does your, I know we've given a brief overview of how you got started and your bio, but what does your day-to-day routine look like?
You know, that's always a really fun question to answer because I don't know if I have a day-to-day. I do clinical work within the office. I said I am a part of the alcohol and other drugs staff counselor team with our center. And so I do a lot of work with basics, which is basically the brief intervention for alcohol, mostly with students who have violated our code of conduct on the university campus for whatever reason, for alcohol or other drugs, particularly alcohol and cannabis. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, teaching workshops around alcohol and drugs, and then also supporting our students who are in the collegiate recovery community. So like today, I've had two or three conversations with students within our collegiate recovery community. And then at 2 o'clock, there's a group of them hanging out on campus for coffee. So I'll drop in today for about 30 minutes just to say hello, catch up. And that's usually the kind of the day-to-day. Managing my clinical responsibilities with my CRC work, and then also the extracurricular stuff that I do, like ARHE and other committees that I serve on.
That sounds really exciting. What are you most passionate about changing within the collegiate recovery?
What am I most passionate about changing?
These are just
the thing
small.
I'm most passionate about is what I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 4,000 universities that confer degrees, and collegiate recovery only happens to be on about 200 of those. So I feel like there's so much work to be done. And so that gets me excited to know that in a lot of ways, I've been a part of something that is very much at the ground level and really working to create capacity and create opportunity for others. So that's something I always really spend a lot of time in, but also understanding that, you know, even though collegiate recovery is in its infancy, it hasn't done as well as it could to truly be inclusive and truly offer a seat at the table for the most marginalized in our communities.
Why do you think that is?
You know, initially I used to think that it was just one of those unintended consequences. But the more and more that I dive into it and the more that I've been around, I just see that there's just so many different power structures that have been in place that never would have allowed certain, you know, doors to be opened in the first place. And I think we're just getting at a place within collegiate recovery and within the larger recovery movement to recognize that and no longer excuse it, but start to actively work against those things. And so, you know, it's coming. It's slow progress, but it is progress. Obviously, in a lot of ways, not fast enough. But I think as long as we continue having open discussions about what it will take to actually create a table that is both inclusive and appreciates the voices that are at those tables, you know, we'll get there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely with your leadership too. I'm curious what the greatest lesson you've learned in your career within collegiate recovery.
Greatest lesson that I've learned has probably been, it's okay not to know everything. You know, I was actually having a conversation with a student today. I affectionately called him an overachiever. But in that overachieving, I think we also oftentimes have a fear of not producing or not being enough. So we're constantly moving. But it's okay not to know everything. It's okay not to do everything perfectly right, dot all the I's and cross all the T's every single time, and having some grace for yourself. So I think that's probably what I've learned the most. And honestly, that's one of those gifts of recovery that is not exclusive to individuals who are in recovery,
Yeah.
right? Having grace for yourself and having grace for others. And I think that's one thing that I've learned more so from the recovery community than I've ever been able to give to the recovery community.
What does grace look like for yourself? What is it, giving yourself grace?
not saying yes to everything.
Yeah.
Understanding that, you know, the more I focus on the things that matter the most to me, the more I can give to others.
Yeah.
You know, really focusing my attention, not being so scattered that I'm only giving small parts of myself, but rather showing up for the things that I'm truly invested in and giving all of myself to those few things rather than, you know, being a river that might be a foot wide, but, you know, 10 feet deep rather than a puddle that's 5 feet wide and an inch deep.
Yeah. It's so hard though too when you're so passionate about collegiate recovery, you want to be involved in all the things. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just being aware of your own capacity, especially during times like COVID, and we're under a lot of stress right now. So what changes would you like to see within the collegiate recovery field?
Ultimately, I think the change I would like to see is a true acceptance of multiple pathways of recovery.
Yeah.
And when I say that, not just multiple paths of abstinence, but truly multiple pathways of recovery. And, you know, having a conversation with a student again today about just how challenging that can be. And recognizing that obviously we're all going to have our own biases, our own challenges and struggles, and trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, and knowing that that might change even from year to year or semester to semester, but being okay with that, understanding that that is a process that that is not easily defined and not easily doesn't easily neatly fit into any one category or bucket. You know, going back to your earlier question in our conversation around some of those early missteps within collegiate recovery and the recovery movement, I think that's one of them, right? It's easy to avoid the messy stuff because that takes longer, right? It takes longer to really negotiate through and work out. And so a lot of times we just want to kind of put a stick in the ground and move forward. But we don't realize how many people we leave behind when we do that.
So
So figuring that
when
piece
you
out.
yeah, and when you and I completely agree with you, when you're talking about all pathways of recovery, we're talking about recovery being through a lens of harm reduction, right? Where abstinence is one of the options.
Right.
What are some of the other pathways that you're talking about?
You know, I think there's many. Smart Recovery is a program that seems to be working, especially for young people.
Yeah.
I think the ultimate goal in Smart Recovery is abstinence, but there's more grace in how people find that in the time that it takes them to get there in Smart Recovery. But maybe it's none of those more mainstream approaches. Maybe it is a management, a moderation management approach or a true harm reduction approach where someone might be abstinent from one substance but continues to use in a non-problematic or non-chaotic way another substance. And how do we negotiate that and navigate that within our collegiate recovery space, which is designed to protect who we consider the most vulnerable on our campuses?
Yeah.
You know, it's a big conversation and a large topic that is not easily defined or worked through in a 1 hour lecture or even a 5 week seminar, right? And so it's one of those things that it just takes time to truly develop. And it might be one of those ideals potentially that is so pie in the sky that it might not ever happen in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't advocate or still try to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really important conversation. And I thank you for, putting that forward. Moving track slightly, so you at the time of us sorting out this webinar, you were president-elect and you're now president of ARHE. So tell me about your vision as president.
think my vision as president is truly more so understanding that, I didn't get to this place on my own, and I won't be able to get to the next level of whatever that might look like by myself either. And so truly understanding what the needs are of the students who we serve, and also the faculty and staff who support them, and really moving collegiate recovery in a way that truly addresses these needs and areas of concern in an equitable and a measured approach that, it's no longer throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, but we truly use the evidence. We always hear about, evidence-based approaches, but there's also evidence-informed approaches. And so what is working that we have seen, even maybe not so much, there's not a ton of literature around collegiate recovery first in and of itself, but how do we start conversations and start moving things forward? Again, I mentioned again that, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 4,000 universities across the nation. And we're barely scratching about 200 of those, I think. So who are we missing? Who hasn't gotten this message that we're passing around collegiate recovery? Who are our partners in other organizations who have the capacity to open some doors for us that we haven't tapped in yet? And so I think if I had a mission for the next 3 or 4 years, that's what it would be.
Yeah, it's really challenging that I mean, I'm in a university that doesn't have a collegiate recovery program, and with my work with ARHE, I'm confused. Like, why would you not? I'm curious, because lots of universities and colleges are going through difficult times with COVID. There's obviously less students coming in. How would you challenge, let's say, a university that doesn't have a collegiate recovery program against the backdrop of having a challenging economic situation? Like, how would you encourage them to get involved when they're already pretty restricted?
I think it goes back to, how are you serving the least amongst you?
Yeah.
What are the needs of those students who don't have a voice on your campus? Are there students on your campus who literally show up every day, go to class and get back on the bus and go home, and they don't hang out in the spaces that were designed for student life because of the risk that is, apparent in, constantly overhearing students talk about rampant substance use or drinking and all these other things that, students in recovery might be literally living in silence and fear of, because there aren't these awesome opportunities and supports on their campuses like a collegiate recovery community. How do we bring those students to the table and ask what it is that they need?
Yeah.
One of the things that I tell students all the time is, as a clinician, if a student is having an issue, they're more likely to go to their student organization leadership, right? If I'm a part of, say, a Black Student Union, I'm probably going to go to the president of Black Student Union if I have an issue about something I'm going through or dealing with, then I would go to the counseling center.
Yeah.
And so if the universities themselves aren't building relationships with their student leaders from across the campus, they're probably not actually hearing the true needs of our students.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really valid point. Is there anything you want to say about your position at ARHE before we move on to, actually, we're coming up to the last question. So if anyone who's listening wants to start to enter some questions into the Q&A box, feel free. Anything you want to add about, it could be in your position as president or as, your role at East Carolina.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I tell people all the time that I fell into one of the most amazing situations at East Carolina University. Being an alum of ECU, I knew the culture, I knew the layout, I knew who to speak to, I knew who were the movers and shakers. And so for us to get our program to where we've gotten it in such a short amount of time, because this past fall was 5 years of our existence, that was a really cool opportunity for me to go back to faculty and staff who I had built relationships for at this point the last 15 years. So at that point, the last the last 10. And say, hey, this is something that I'm interested in. This is something I'm working on. How can we work together? And so I know that, and I had a lot of doors that were open for me that maybe would not have been the case if, say, I had moved across the country and stepped on a campus for the very first time trying to start collegiate recovery. But I think there's something to be said too about building where you are and establishing relationships, knowing that in the future, that could really come back to really help you out in a large way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're really great at having those conversations. We've had a few of those conversations in the past too. It's always really fascinating to hear about your perspective and your role in collegiate recovery. So the last question I have is, what is your greatest achievement within collegiate recovery?
Greatest achievement within collegiate recovery would probably be a text message I received this week of a student who sent me his diploma in a photo. He took a photo of his diploma and sent it to me in a text message. You know, and I don't say that I did that in any way, right? Like that wasn't, he worked for that, that was his thing. But he actually learned about collegiate recovery when we were like in year 1 or year 2. And he came to check us out and really wasn't feeling it. And ultimately it was just like, hey, like I respect what's happening here, but I'm not there yet. I'm not ready for this. And I would always say, yeah, well, you know, the door is always open.
Right.
And we would check in from time to time via phone call, text message. And then one day he decided, hey, I want to get back involved. Interestingly enough, this same student was really active for a period of time. Initially, when he was trying to figure out if this was for him or not.
Yeah.
And he was going to be awarded a most involved participation certificate that semester. But he had he missed that at last meeting and then didn't show up for like a year.
Yeah.
But I kept the certificate. And so when he popped back up finally, I said, hey man, this is gonna make you laugh, but here's your most involved participant certificate for a year ago. And, you know, I don't know, I would like to think that that had made some difference in saying, hey, like this can be home. I'm safe here. You know, I can always come back. I mean, he stuck with it and became a really solid student leader for us and just graduated this past May. So that's just one of the many stories I could probably tell. And again, that is not that's not me tooting my own horn, but I think it speaks to the environment and the space that we've created at ECU and within our collegiate recovery community that really more than anything speaks to the students and their willingness to just be that open door.
Right. And we've had conversations before about, you know, some students not feeling part of collegiate recovery or not wanting to access collegiate recovery. What would you say to any of those students listening if they're, you know, if they're thinking, is this for me? And you know, could it help me, or is it another barrier?
It very well could be a barrier. You know, I think that depends on the student. I think that depends on the culture of the program. You know, I think there's a lot of factors there. But if I was to speak to a student and say, hey, you won't know until you try it out. And also, this is your opportunity to find your voice. So if there's something here that's not working out for you, if you don't make those things known, there's no way that I or anyone else in this group can fix it.
Right.
You know, one of the things that I've really seen here recently, because of COVID and everything else that's happening, our students are facing a lot of isolation. They're facing a lot of loneliness, a lot of challenges that are, you know, tempting them to want to use. And they're bringing those issues to me. And if I get 3 or 4 of the students saying the exact same things, I'll say, you know what? I'm glad you're sharing that with me, but I'm sure there's someone within our group that would love to hear that you have similar concerns that they do. How about just dropping that in a group meeting and asking if anybody's available for coffee this week? And that took some prodding for like multiple students for several weeks. But for the last month, our group has actually been linking up Friday afternoons at 2 o'clock for coffee.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you as my final question, what would you say to a student who's struggling, but you just answered it.
Yeah.
What about the student who doesn't have a collegiate recovery program, you know, that might be in recovery or might be trying to access recovery? What would you advise them to do if they're struggling right now?
I think the biggest thing that I would advise that particular student to do is to utilize the resources that are available to you. You know, the World Wide Web has been one of the greatest gifts that has been present to us within COVID that I don't even think, one of the things I think we took for granted.
Yeah.
But now that we're in a space, in a world where everything is online and a lot of meetings have gone virtual, you know, we have students within our collegiate recovery community who tap into Unity Recovery's virtual meetings daily or weekly.
Yeah.
You know, our collegiate recovery communities all over the country are having virtual meetings. So, you know, it takes a little bit of effort on your part.
Yeah.
But find out what's available and see who you can contact or tap in.
Yeah.
East Carolina University is a public university. And so we've always had the mindset that we had a duty and a service to the community that we're in, being Eastern North Carolina and Greenville and the county that we're in. And so even when we were face to face, we allowed members of the community who weren't necessarily students of ECU to attend our collegiate recovery meetings on our campus. Because, you know, it didn't cost us anything to host those meetings. So we weren't using student fees to run those meetings. We weren't charging admission or anything of that nature. We weren't giving away, you know, laptops or textbooks, anything that, you know, would be necessarily considered exclusive to our ECU students. So why not open that door? And I think a lot of universities have similar policies or conversations, especially now in this virtual space. And so if there are meetings that are happening virtually, see if you can get that, you know, that Zoom code and check a meeting out, and just start conversations.
Yeah. Or you could join our, you know, and you could join our social media pages and watch out for things that we're hosting at ARHE, because we can share that information too. So in closing, is there anything else you want to add?
I'm looking forward to the day that we all get to hang out again at a national.
Yeah.
We have a virtual conference coming up. But I mean, we're going now on almost 2 years from the last time that I've been able to hug someone from California, you know, being in North Carolina. And so, you know, that's the one thing I'm certainly looking forward to.
Yeah, some hugging. That'd be real nice. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today, Jay. I just want to remind everyone that's listening that this will be recorded. It is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to YouTube and the ARHE website. Our next panel is going to be, it was the panel that was postponed because of Texas. The circumstances in Texas will be on the 3rd of March at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that's going to be a panel on the topic of Black students in recovery. So thanks so much for joining us today and have a great day.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.